I'm just going to talk it. Good morning, and thank you, Senators Liu and Block, for inviting me to speak today about equity, access, and success in higher education. I'm Estela Bensimon. I am a professor of higher education at the University of Southern California, Rossier School of Education, and I also co-direct the Center for Urban Education. And because it's relevant to the topic today, I want to just say briefly why I founded the Center for Urban Education in the year 2000, almost 15 years ago. At the time, in 1999, institutions of higher education, particularly here in California, would celebrate the great diversity of their student body. They would point out with pride how much access they were providing to African Americans, to Latinos, and to other groups. However, there was no talk or goals related to achieving equity in outcomes for those diverse students. So that was one of my concerns. It wasn't enough to provide access, but we also needed to make sure that diversity was being translated into equity in outcomes. My second concern that led to the founding of the center is that at that time, higher education throughout the country was talking about the importance of accountability metrics as well as assessment. However, equity was never included as a metric of accountability or a metric of quality or a metric of institutional effectiveness. So I'm here to talk about why is it that we must incorporate equity intentionally into accountability and performance systems. So I'm going to, you have my statement, and I provide two arguments for why equity is important. The first argument, I go back to 1964. In July, we're going to commemorate 50 years of the Civil Rights Act. And the reason why I bring it into the discussion is because the Civil Rights Act is one of the best examples that we have in our country of the use of policy to repair the ills that were subjected to African American populations since the Civil War. The Civil Rights Act would have not been possible had two presidents, John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, been willing to speak about race and racism openly. And that is also one of the reasons why we cannot leave equity up to chance. We do have to name it. When President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and he subsequently gave a famous speech at Howard University, one of the things that he said, the purpose of this act is to achieve equality, not just in theory, but equality in fact and in results. Clearly, we have not achieved that. We have not achieved equality in results. The second argument, since sometimes equity makes people uncomfortable because in part of our culture in the United States is a bootstrap theory, so that we give equal opportunity, but it is up to people to achieve equity in results. So the second argument is more of an economic argument. And in my presentation, I cite the work of Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, who has written persuasively about inequality and how it essentially affects our economic status, because essentially inequality, it drives away growth. In order to have a healthy society economically, and this is particularly true for California, we have to have a strong middle class. And a strong middle class has, with purchasing power, to produce the tax receipts that Landy mentioned. In California, we cannot achieve a healthy middle class unless more Latinos go to college and graduate from college and are able to attain the kinds of jobs that we need to maintain that middle class. With that said, then, what I would like to move on to is that we have mentioned the master plan, and the master plan in 1960 certainly provided access to higher education. But if you look at my presentation on page 5, you will see that population in 1960 was 16 million people, half of what we have today, less than half of what we have today. And 83% of the population was white. Only 9% was Latino. Fast forward 14 years later, on page 6 of my presentation, and you can see that the population has changed dramatically. Whites are less than half of what they were in 1960, 40%, and Latinos are 38% of our population. So given this demographics, we need to have a performance and accountability system that is aligned with our population of 2014, not with our population of 1960. On page 7, because the term equity is obviously a complex term, and it probably means lots of different things to different people, I provide 3 definitions, and I am recommending that in thinking about performance measures, we have to think about measures that look at equity in access, measures that look at equity in outcomes, and measures that look at equity in excellence. And by what I mean by that is, we need to look at access to higher education for Latinos, African Americans, and others based on their size of their high school population. The WICHE, in their report, Knocking at the College Door, predicts that, calculates that about 47% of Latinos will make up 47% of the high school graduates in 2015-16. Equity in access would mean that what we should strive for is that at least 40% of the student population in the UC system that is Latino. That would be equity. But right now, Latinos make up only 20% of the UC system. In fact, Latinos, given their high school size, are underrepresented in every segment of the system, including community colleges, despite their high concentration in the community colleges. So I'm defining equity as proportional representation based on the population, not in comparison to other racial or ethnic groups. I included excellence, and the reason why I included excellence is because often when we speak about equity and minority groups, we tend to think about them in terms of survival. It is important for more Latinos to go into the STEM fields, the high-value degrees, the high-paying degrees. And that's why we also need to monitor what their participation is in those programs. So let me go on now to what I'd like to comment on is the sustainability plan that the governor proposes, and specifically the measures that are included for the UC and the CSU system. And even though the move towards having measures is a positive one, we are concerned at the Center for Urban Education that the measures that are being proposed do not include equity. And let me just briefly say why they do not include equity there. First of all, the proposed measures are that the UC and the CSU system report measures for graduation and enrollment, but they are not, there is no specificity about disaggregating them by race and ethnicity. And to give you an example why it is a problem not to require that they be disaggregated by race and ethnicity, under the governor's performance measure, if we looked at the UC system and we just looked at the 4-year graduation rate, we would see that it has a 59% 4-year graduation rate. But when you break that down by race and ethnicity, the percent for African Americans, that 59% goes down to 40%, and for Latinos, it goes down to 46%. Right now, we will not see those disparities if we adopted performance measures that are not disaggregated by race and ethnicity. The second problem with the performance measures is that there is no requirement for setting improvement targets. If we have no improvement targets, then we run the risk of continuing the steady state in terms of the enrollment, for instance, of Latinos and African Americans in the UC system, which has changed very little over the last 10 years. The third problem with the performance measures is that they are not linked to any kind of incentive funding. And by not being linked to incentive funding, I think that it makes it much more difficult to achieve the goals delineated in SB 195. If my time is up, tell me, okay? Because I'll go on. But I'm almost done.
Right.
The other problem with the performance measures is that they only address the UC and the CSU system, and the community colleges are left out. Even though the community colleges now have the the success scorecard, as well as the equity plans, we see that as a problem. We believe that both the scorecard and the equity plans need to be integrated into one system. A problem also with the community college scorecard is that it's a reporting mechanism. Goals do not have to be set from year to year. You asked earlier about what other states are doing. And one of the things that, and I'm going to mention Pennsylvania here, is that in order to be mindful of the different missions of the different campuses, in addition to having mandatory goals, Pennsylvania also has optional goals that the campuses select to align with their own strategic plans. And that is a more innovative way of doing it. It also ensures greater buy-in. The last concern that we have is, and if you look at page 11, I have that data and metrics are akin to a thermometer. They show the temperature, but just as a thermometer cannot change the temperature, data are not self-acting. And no matter how big of a reporting system we have, no matter how many metrics we have, if we do not have the structure for institutions of higher education to use the data not only to improve the performance of their students, but also to study their own practices, a data system will not necessarily make a difference in the outcomes for students. One last point that I want to make is that when we talk about accountability, we need to differentiate between bureaucratic accountability and professional accountability. You asked earlier, is money the only incentive to bring about change? It's not. In our work with Pennsylvania, with Wisconsin, faculty members are willing to get their hands dirty in data and to look at their own practices if provided with a structure and tools to do that. Right now here in California, we do not have that. What we have is data. We need to move on to the next stage to be able to incentivize professional accountability as well at the campus levels. Thank you.